If all goes well, on the morning of October 31st, 2021, the future of human astronomy and our understanding of the universe will change forever. Aboard an Ariane 5 will probably be the most valuable piece of equipment that the European Space Agency has ever launched. The greatest and most powerful telescope that will give us a view of the universe unlike any other that we have ever witnessed. If all goes according to plan, all of the images and all of the discoveries made by the Hubble Space Telescope, as remarkable as they are, will pale by comparison, which is probably why they're using this particular rocket, because although it's outdated and although it's expendable and a bit wasteful, it's also incredibly reliable, because this launch has to go absolutely right, because literally the work of decades has gone into this instrument and, of course, billions of dollars. I am, of course, talking about the James Webb Telescope, and although this thing has gone over budget and has been marred by delay after delay, for once I don't mind that much, because it's absolutely vital that we get this right the first time. Because if we have any problems like we did with Hubble, it's going to be virtually impossible to fix them because it's going to be sitting so far out, well over 1,000,000 kilometers away from the Earth, at a location called Lagrange Point 2, which is going to give it an unparalleled view of the universe for so many reasons. But to the average SpaceX fan like myself, why should this be so important? I mean, yes, it's going to teach us a lot about the ancient history of the universe and the structure of the cosmos that we live in, about places that are immensely distant, so far. In addition to all of those things, it's also going to tell us a lot about exoplanets that are in our own neighborhood. Everything. Good evening, and welcome to a very special episode of the Angry Astronaut. And what makes this special? Well, it's the fact that we just surpassed 25,000 subscribers. And I'm very excited about that, of course. And this coffee cup is growing increasingly nervous. And for those of you who are new to this channel, this cup is going to get blasted into 1,000 bits, as any piece of Boeing propaganda should, as soon as this channel hits 40,000 subscribers. So we are rapidly advancing on that goal. And thank you very much for helping me accomplish that. Another reason that I'm very excited is that we have a new piece of merch that was created by one of my supporters, Ryan OC, as he goes by, and it is for Mars Base Alpha, as we have finally decided to call it. Ryan actually created a mission patch for a Scottish rocket company known as Skyrora. And so he agreed to do a mission patch for my fictional base on Phobos, which I am very excited about. And you'll see some details about that in the course of this episode. But it might seem kind of strange to all of you for me to commemorate 25,000 subscribers by talking about the James Webb Space Telescope. I mean, it's not the sort of thing that I talk about much on this channel, and some SpaceX supporters might question why we should be excited about it. I mean, it bears all the hallmarks of everything else that NASA has done. It's taken entirely too long. It's over budget. It's cost us billions upon billions of dollars, which has prevented NASA from doing other projects, like, for example, getting to the moon. So, aside from the pure scientific value of this instrument, which surpasses the capability of any telescope that we have ever put into space, by far, what other benefits does it bring us? What benefit could it possibly bring to SpaceX or indeed to our colonization of the solar system and our goals of making the solar system, or rather Mars or whatever planet we choose, a lifeboat for the human race? There doesn't seem to be any connection there. This telescope just seems to be teaching us about places that we will never, ever go, perhaps never in the history of our entire species. So, what's so important about it? Well, I'm going to explain all of that. And some of it, at least what I'm the most excited about, is what it's going to potentially bring to us in terms of details about exoplanets and especially extraterrestrial civilizations. And yes, this is where my channel gets a little strange sometimes, because anytime I talk about that subject, I oftentimes delve into a fictional tale. And that's where we are going to be starting right now. So get ready for things to get a little bit strange here on this commemorative episode of The Angry Astronaut. About 5 centuries ago, in a trinary star system not so far away from our own planet, there lived a species who called themselves We Who Survived. And although they may have called themselves something different in the past, their name was quite appropriate. The sun that this planet orbited was a red dwarf, and although the species was highly resistant to the radioactive bursts that it would sometimes put out, it was also tidally locked, meaning that the atmosphere was incredibly violent and most of the planet was uninhabitable. Therefore, because the resources on this planet were so limited and the habitable living space was so restricted, they invariably fought over it. And as their technology advanced, the results of this fighting were quite predictable, until eventually the planet became even more uninhabitable, and the species was very much in danger of going extinct, in spite of the fact that their resistance to radioactivity gave them a chance of survival in the aftermath of nuclear conflict. Faced with a dying world, they ventured out into their own asteroid belt, locating a variety of asteroids suitable for their purposes, and they converted them into generation ships, bound for nearby stars with suitable planets, which they were able to identify with their highly advanced telescopes. Although they found many promising worlds, the most promising was orbiting what's called a K3 type star, only a few light years away, and so they sent the majority of their generation ships to this star and indeed found the planet to be perfect for their needs. And so they inhabited it, and their civilization grew rapidly, driven on by the fact that an ancient neutron star collision had loaded the system with plutonium. In fact, this system was loaded with all kinds of radioactives and rare elements, and although these things held a grim history as far as their nuclear wars of the past, they had passed this particular part of their history, and they were able to use these materials to drive their developing civilization. And so we who survived had indeed lived up to their name, or so they thought. Centuries later, another species was embarking on their own exploration of the cosmos, having ironically let one of these generation ships pass right through their solar system, ignoring its strange configuration and behavior and the fact that it accelerated not like an asteroid, but like a light sail. But nevertheless, the new instruments that they were about to send out into the solar system were going to provide them with unprecedented information about the universe and about nearby exoplanets. The telescope was bound for a very important location called Lagrange Point 2, 1.5 million kilometers away from the Earth. And what made that special was that this location, kind of an interplanetary parking lot, would allow it to stay in line with the Earth as it orbited the Sun. And the reason this was important was the same reason that the ship was performing maneuvers right after launch to protect the telescope from the rays of the sun, because this telescope was going to observe the cosmos in the infrared spectrum, and in order for it to be able to do that, the equipment had to stay incredibly cold, as in negative 233 degrees Celsius. And since the most distant objects in the universe tend to be red-shifted, this would allow this telescope to see things far further away than Hubble ever did. It's not just the 6.5-meter mirror that would make all of the difference. This orbital location will also allow James Webb to stay in constant contact with the Earth, and in addition to that, keep its sun shield oriented between it and the sun, therefore giving a variety of temperatures between 85 degrees on the hot side and, as I said, negative 233 degrees on the cold side. Quite a piece of equipment, and it's going to take months for it to reach its destination. So much had to go right and so little could go wrong with the deployment of this instrument that it created a huge amount of tension and anxiety with the people responsible for it back on Earth. And so, this telescope closed in on its destination and all of the discoveries that waited for it. A couple of centuries prior to this, we who survived experienced their second existential crisis. They observed an entire disk of a forming planetary system completely vanish within the space of a few years. No natural explanation could be found for this. No black holes, nothing that could make this much matter disappear this quickly. And so they naively sent a ship to investigate, having mastered the art of interstellar nuclear travel some time ago. It was a decision made with the best of intentions, but perhaps the last one that this civilization would ever make. For this phenomena was not caused by a civilization building a megastructure as they had thought, but rather by a silicon-based life form called Omega Null. This was a monster that we who survived had long suspected might exist, but had never actually encountered. A monster that broke down matter throughout a solar system, living or not, and created duplicates of itself using the material as source matter. It was a type of civilization that did not care for the existence of others, cared for nothing except for its prime directive, which was to make copies of itself and survive. It made short work of the expedition, breaking down both its matter and its knowledge, including the knowledge of its point of origin, and then made its way towards this point with a vow that they would be able to hold off this hyper-intelligent and horrifying enemy. Centuries after this drama had played out, the James Webb Space Telescope was beginning to deploy its sun. Less than the thickness of a human hair would be sufficient to protect the finely tuned instruments from the heat of the sun, which was absolutely vital since these instruments had to be separated not only from the sun, but also from the heat of the Earth or any other sources of heat that might interfere with their observations. The telescope carried a suite of 4 instruments: the near-infrared spectrograph, the mid-infrared instrument, the near-infrared camera, and the fine guidance system / near-infrared imager and slitless spectrograph. And fortunately, all of these things had abbreviations, but nevertheless, all of these instruments would allow this telescope to peer back in time, all the way to the beginning of the solar system, or at least 1 to 200 million years after the Big Bang. In addition, however, this telescope would also be able to determine the exact composition of the atmospheres of several hundred nearby exoplanets, looking for signs of techno-signatures such as industrial pollution, high levels of albedo created by cities or solar panels, and a variety of other things, therefore could only develop simple microbiological types of life. Strangely, these exobiologists seem to have forgotten the life forms on their own planet, such as scorpions that could absorb up to 185,000 Roentgens worth of radiation and still survive for at least a month, and this creature was far from a simple form of life. On the contrary, scorpions can hunt intelligently using strategy. They can also carry their young on their back, showing a nurturing instinct. They can also remember dig sites for years and clean themselves, a creature that shows promise of perhaps eventually becoming intelligent, as we who survived did, not being entirely unlike this species themselves. Another techno-signature that James Webb would be excellent at discovering would be something called a Dyson Sphere, an artificial megastructure designed to trap a sun's energy and use it for immense amounts of power for an extremely advanced civilization. Such a structure would give off an enormous amount of waste heat in the infrared, something that James Webb would be excellent at detecting. However, the vast majority of the scientific community regards such structures as being impossible. So would James Webb actually be pointed at star systems that had mysteriously disappeared? However, one thing was certain. If James Webb did indeed discover solid evidence for the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization, new space telescopes would be deployed in very short order, including very large radio telescopes on the opposite side of the moon that would not be interfered with by Earth radio traffic, other sorts of now. But had we known what was about to become of we who survived all those centuries ago, we who survived were in a state of utter panic due to the self-replicating nature of their oncoming enemy, and because of the vast technological difference and the hyper-intelligent nature of the Omega Null. All strategic projections showed that they would lose their war against their silicon enemy and be consumed by it, and so they prepared to escape for the Omega Null, and the monstrous fate that it had awaiting for them certainly was something that they did not want to have to face. And yet they began to despair, for it was obvious that the Omega Null would eventually track them down no matter where they went, and consume not only them, but every other civilization in the galaxy. And yet, when all hope seemed to be lost, a sudden blast from a nearby star system that they couldn't even see aside from its infrared signature completely annihilated the Omega Null fleet. As we who survived pondered in complete confusion, they suddenly received a signal from their own star system. We who survived learned that the signal came from a self-replicating probe called Cypher, which had been lurking in their own solar system ever since they had arrived, and even before that. It had remained silent, watching their development, and communicated with them only now to explain to them what had just happened. Cypher identified itself as having been created by another silicon-based civilization called We Who Became One, But this civilization was very different. This civilization, having once been biological, had imbued itself with all of the morals and all of the compassion that the species had retained while it was in its older form, thus making it a far more peaceful civilization. It had waged war with the Omega Null in the past, and it barely survived. Fearing the duplicates of the Omega Null might still survive somewhere in the galaxy, or that other civilizations might also create hyper-intelligent artificial intelligences with a directive to kill, this civilization had spread throughout the galaxy, creating Dyson Spheres with phased beam emitters designed to destroy these civilizations wherever they might find them. And so this had been We Who Survived salvation. Cypher had noticed their plight, notified the closest Dyson Sphere, and it had destroyed this copy of the Omega Null before it was even aware that the destructive energy was on the way. Many began to worship Cypher as a god or a savior until it replied that it found such behavior embarrassing and shut down. But having realized that the universe was a very dangerous place, We Who Survived took 50% of the radioactives in their system, including radioactives that could only be created in a laboratory, and loaded their star with these things as a clear techno-signature to warn off any potentially hostile civilizations that might approach them, although this techno-signature was not recognized as such by everybody. Centuries later, however, We Who Survived received a signal from another one of their generation ships, and apparently they had discovered another civilization on the third planet of a rather ordinary star who was developing hyper-intelligent AI, also with a directive to kill. They became very concerned about this, and although they had not disturbed Cypher for some time, they decided that now was the time to do so. However, Cypher replied that the activity of this species had already been registered and the problem had already been addressed. When We Who Survived asked exactly what that meant, Cypher uttered a single and ominous warning to never make the same mistake that this civilization had done. The probe then went silent and never spoke again.